Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the University of the Highlands and Islands, I'm delighted to welcome you to this lecture and also to welcome our audience in Perth who are videoing in. This is the first of 3 lectures on the theme of communication and social responsibility, and this lecture tonight will be given by Dr. Richard Holloway. Richard Holloway is a writer and broadcaster. A Fellow of the Royal Society of Edinburgh, he received its medal in 2008. He is the author of 26 books, including Godless Morality, Doubt and Loves, Looking in the Distance, and Between the Monster and the Saint, Reflections on the Human Condition, and his next book, Leaving Alexandria, a memoir of faith and doubt, will be published in March 2012. He was Bishop of Edinburgh and Primus of the Scottish Episcopal Church till he stood down in 2000. He was Gresham Professor of Divinity in the City of London from 1997 to 2001. He was a member of the Human Fertilization and Embryology Authority from its inception in 1990 till 1997 and chaired its Ethics Committee. He was also on the BMA Steering Group on Ethics and Genetics from 1995 to 98, and he is a member of the Broadcasting Standards Commission from 2000 to 2003, and if that isn't enough, he was also chairman of the Scottish Arts Council from 2005 to 2010. A frequent broadcaster, he has presented a number of television series, including Holloway's Road, The Sword and the Cross, and Art and the Soul. He presented BBC Scotland's flagship book programme, Cover Stories, for 3 years, and currently presents Sunday Morning with Richard Holloway. Given that impressive record, I'm sure you'll agree with me that Richard is well placed to talk about communication and social responsibility, and I would ask you to extend a very warm welcome to Richard Holloway, our lecturer tonight. Thank you. Thank
you. Good evening, everyone, and thank you, James, for that very warm introduction. I'm always very happy to come to the lovely city of Inverness, especially on a nice day like this, and it's an honor to be invited to give this lecture. I've called it Sudokus and Symphonies, and I hope that the meaning of the title will become clear. It's actually about killing time. During the second term of President Reagan's administration in the United States of America, William Bennett, Reagan's Secretary of State for Education, publicly complained that the people who really ruled the United States were not the current occupants of the White House, but liberals and their cronies who consistently displayed a disdain for the Judeo-Christian values that had made America great. The political commentator Rick Hertzberg, the son of an unbelieving Jewish father and a Quaker mother, fired off this reply in the New Yorker magazine. As a Judeo-Christian who has an aversion to religion and who's an American as good as or better than any mouse-haired, Bible-touting, apartheid-promoting evangelist on any UHF television station you can name, I must protest. Where was it written that if you don't like religion, you are somehow disqualified from being a legitimate American? What was Mark Twain, a Russian? When did it become un-American to have opinions about the origin and meaning of the universe that come from sources other than the body of dogma of organizations approved by the federal government as certifiably Judeo-Christian? If it's American to believe that God ordered tribe X to abjure pork, or that he caused leader Y to be born to a virgin, why is it suddenly un-American to doubt that the prime mover of this unimaginably vast universe of quintillions of solar systems would be likely to be obsessed with questions involving the dietary and biosexual behavior of a few thousand bipeds inhabiting a small part of a speck of dust orbiting a third-rate star in an obscure spiral arm of one of a million galaxies. End of quote. And that's a quote with chutzpah. I want to offer 2 words in response to that eloquent outburst, and my first word is amen. Amen, because like Rick Hertzberg, I object to the way some religious leaders rate their sacred texts above all other texts on earth as carriers of knowledge and wisdom. So I say amen to Rick Hertzberg's protest at religious arrogance and its tendency to think its values are the only values available to us. But my second word has to be nevertheless, because it is by means of these few thousand bipeds called Homo sapiens that this universe is thinking about itself and has become aware of its own existence. There may be self-conscious, rational creatures in other corners of the universe, but we are the only ones we know about, and it seems to have taken the universe 14 billion years for us to appear. Well, the universe may not be in a hurry to explain and understand itself, but we are. Since we arrived on the scene about 50,000 years ago, mentally ready and raring to go, our knowledge of reality has increased so rapidly that I'm tempted to think that next to light itself, the human mind is the fastest thing in the universe. Here's a poem that captures the wonder of it all by Primo Levi, a survivor of the Holocaust, a chemist, a humanist, a poet who carried the pain of the 20th century into his own suicide. Fellow humans, to whom a year is a long time, a century a venerable goal, struggling for your bread, tired, fretful, tricked, sick, lost, listen, and may it be mockery and consolation. 20 billion years before now, brilliant, soaring in space and time, there was a ball of flame, solitary, eternal, our common Father and our executioner. It exploded, and every change began. Even now, the thin echo of this one reverse catastrophe resounds from the farthest reaches. From that one spasm, everything was born. The same abyss that unfolds and challenges us, the same time that spawns and defeats us, everything anyone has ever thought, the eyes of every woman we have loved, sons by the thousands, and this hand that writes. And this hand that writes. That's what I want to think about this evening. The astonishing creativity of the human animal, flowing from the big brains that have evolved in us to be instruments of communication and transformation. It is from our minds and their desire to understand existence that religion and science and philosophy have emerged. But this evening, I want to concentrate on another aspect of our fertile minds, human art and culture. Culture has been defined as any widespread behavior that is transmitted by learning rather than acquired by inheritance. And on this planet, it is unique to us. We are the creative animal. You won't find a bunch of other animals dedicated to listening to a boring lecture anywhere else on the planet this evening. No colloquies of camels meeting to discuss the nature of camelhood, but here we are, and we do it all the time because we are the creative animal, the thinking animal, the animal that's an object of interest to itself, and the universe is an object of interest to itself. At the root of our ability to create culture, I believe, is the problem we have with time and its companion, boredom. Just think of a few of the ways we talk about time: passing time, filling time, redeeming time, doing time. And you don't just have to be a prisoner to understand the boredom of that kind of stretch of time. It seems to us, the creative animal, that once the necessities of life are more or less provided for, the human animal has a problem with time and what to do with it. And what we've done with it is to fill it with imaginative inventions that become more and more complex and absorbing. And sometimes they are astonishingly beautiful. This is the impulse that gives us everything from Sudoku to symphonies, literary masterpieces, and television soap operas, and even that strange Scottish pastime, hitting a wee white ball into the face of a force 10 gale and claiming to enjoy it. Golf. We do these things. Watch people on a train. You've got 5 hours to go from Waverley to King's Cross. People are reading, they're doing crosswords, they're doing their emails, they're shouting into their phones. The one thing they don't do is nothing, because time has to be filled. Time stretches, it troubles us if we're on our own with nothing to do. If trying to distract ourselves from the boredom of plodding time is one of the roots of art, then another is even more surprising. Art is one of the ways in which the troubled or despised have sought to console and understand themselves. The novelist Rebecca West claimed that artistic genius was, and this phrase is in quotes, the abnormal justifying itself, end of quote. And she went on, those who know that they are for whatever reason condemned by the laws of life make themselves one with life by some magnificent act of creation. I found those words from Rebecca West in Victoria Glendinning's wonderful biography of Vita Sackville-West, the wife of Harold Nicholson. Glendinning applied them to Vita herself and suggested that her magnificent act of creation was neither her poetry nor her fiction, but the garden that she created at Sissinghurst Castle in Kent. If you've ever been to that garden, you'll remember what a wonder it is. This is how her son Nigel describes it. Harold made the design, Vita did the planting. In the firm perspective of vistas, one can trace his classical hand in the overflowing clematis, figs, vines, and wisteria, in the rejection of violent color or anything too tame or orderly, one discovers her romanticism. Wildflowers must be allowed to invade the garden. If plants stray over a path, they must not be cut back. The visitor must duck. Rhododendrons must be banished in favor of their tender cousin, the azalea. Roses must not electrify, but seduce. And when a season has produced its best, that part of the garden must be allowed to lie fallow for another year, since there is a cycle in nature that must not be disguised. It is eternally renewable, like a play with acts and scenes. There can be a change of cast, but the script remains the same. Permanence and mutation are the secrets of this garden. When West described artists as being condemned by the laws of life, she was not, of course, talking about the ways of nature so lovingly celebrated by Vita in her garden, but of those man-made laws we call custom or morality. Glendinning applied this insight to Vita's homosexuality. If you are told by church and society that what you are in your very essence is wrong, it will create a dissonance, a disjunction between your own soul and the norms of the community that surrounds you. Rebecca West is saying that creativity has one of its roots in that disconnection between prevailing attitudes and the reality of the maker's life. That dissonance, she suggests, is the grit in the soul that becomes the pearl of great price, wonderful art. Of course, the flip side of that process is revealed when social change swaps curse for blessing and the outlaw is brought in from the cold. A good example of this reverse dynamic is provided by the career of the playwright Terence Rattigan, who's been having a bit of a revival recently in the West End in London. Rattigan's biographer Michael Darlow pinpointed the problem that started to confront all homosexual writers in Britain when the theatre began to change in the 1960s. This is what he wrote. Until the late 1950s, Rattigan's art as a dramatist depended upon the oblique, the implicit, the struggle of frightened, damaged people to find self-expression and fulfillment in a society whose strict moral codes had always inhibited them. That's why a lot of gay writers wrote in a kind of code. But once those moral codes began to be relaxed, Rattigan was not only out of fashion, he was stranded. Not only his technique as a writer, but his background and lifetime's conditioning meant that however passionately he resented the old hypocrisies, he was not equipped to make do without them, because they were the way he made art. The result was that when he tried to confront sex, however frankly and sincerely, in the permissive atmosphere of the post-Osborne theatre, he always seemed evasive, insincere, and sometimes actually embarrassing. I sometimes also reflect on another group of distinctively gay artists who used their homosexuality as a code. A lot of famous radio comics spoke to each other in a kind of code that a lot of homophobic people adored, not knowing what the language was actually about. This is Rebecca West, the abnormal, the marginalized, justifying themselves, making art out of their pain. I want to conclude this section of my thesis with a poignant footnote that takes us back across the Atlantic. One of the most remarkable illustrations of Rebecca West's claim that great art comes from the maker's attempt to bring sense and meaning out of rejection and oppression has to be the music that came from African American slaves in the United States. Think of the longing and pain in those famous Negro spirituals and the way their music transfigured anguish into art. They make you cry at the very thought of them. One way to connect with that tradition is through Michael Tippett's oratorio, A Child of Our Time, in which the great spirituals are like the passion chorales of Bach, used to capture and transcend human suffering. Nobody knows the trouble I've seen. Steal away, steal away, steal away to Jesus. You can feel the pain of those people enslaved thousands of miles away from their own homeland, their hearts broken, making art out of torment. If you want another image to hold this particular enormity that was transcended into beauty, then think of the great persecuted African-American singer, Paul Robeson. I have an image of him, must have been from a movie, standing in the chains of slavery, singing Old Man River. That's a famous song. He envied the river. You and I, he's singing to the other slaves, we sweat and we're in pain, but Old Man River, he just keeps rolling on. And it summed up the agony in that instant of beauty, pain transfigured into great art. Let me leave that insight for a moment and turn to a different but related point, still on the subject of how art comes, made by another writer. On the 7th of October 1948, the BBC Third Programme broadcast a discussion on the role of the writer in society, and Graham Greene was one of the participants. After a preamble in which he said that the artist, like any decent human, owed certain general duties to society, he went on to say that there were two specific duties owed by the novelist: to tell the truth and to accept no special privileges from the state. Greene believed that to artists, the kindness of the state was far more dangerous than its indifference. He pointed out that in the Russia of the time, artists belonged to a privileged class. They'd been given better flats, more money, more food, even a certain freedom of movement. But the state had asked in return that they should cease to be artists. He went on to suggest that this danger did not only exist in totalitarian countries, the bourgeois state too had its compromising gifts to offer artists that squeezed the art out of them. Some days after that broadcast, he developed the thought in a letter to V.S. Pritchett. Green, quoting Browning, saw the writer as one who stood on the dangerous edge of things and should never commit his soul to any establishment or institution. For the artist, he said, disloyalty was the queen of virtues. I quote, "I would emphasize once again the importance and the virtue of disloyalty. If only writers could maintain that one virtue unspotted from the world. Loyalty confines us to accepted opinions. Loyalty forbids us to comprehend sympathetically our dissident fellows. But disloyalty encourages us to roam experimentally through any human mind. It gives to the novelist the extra dimension of sympathy." End of quote. Green feared the corrupting effect of power on the freedom of the artist. He saw the danger at its most blatant in totalitarian societies, where the artist is only allowed to produce art that conforms to the objectives of the state. But he also saw it in religious institutions, where artists are encouraged to conform their art to the values of the faith they follow. Green was acutely aware of this particular pressure on his own soul. He wrote again, "I belong to a group, the Catholic Church, which would present me with great problems as a writer if I were not saved by my disloyalty. There are leaders of the church who regard literature as a means to one end, edification. Literature has nothing to do with edification. I'm not arguing that literature is amoral, but that it presents a personal moral. And the personal morality of an individual is seldom identical with the morality of the group to which he belongs. You remember the black and white squares in Bishop Blougram's chessboard? As a novelist, I must be allowed to write from the point of view of the black square as well as of the white. Doubt and even denial must be given their chance of self-expression." To the artist's struggle with customary morality, to Graham Greene's fear of the compromising pressures on the writer from powerful institutions, both religious and political, we ought to add the corrupting influence of the market on artists and their work, particularly, though not exclusively, in the field of contemporary visual art and film. We've all heard stories of Hollywood accountants interfering with the artistic integrity of a film in order to make it more marketable. The way the studios carved up Sergio Leone's epic film Once Upon a Time in America and turned his masterpiece into a puzzling ragbag is a case in point, as is the number they did on Michael Cimino's great film Heaven's Gate, though it has to be admitted that he bankrupted his studio in making it. But what's that between an artist and his public? The fact that the director's cut of both movies were later made available to the public, enabling us to see what we had missed, is a perfect example of the way the power of the market can also compromise artistic integrity. And this is not the only way in which the market exerts a baleful influence on human creativity. The market, in our time, has become the most dominant force in all our lives, and it's having a distorting effect on all our activities, including our cultural and educational institutions, a point to which I'll return shortly at the end of this talk. But let me leave these issues to one side for the moment and return to the mystery of creativity itself. So far, I have suggested that the need to escape boredom and the need to assert our individuality in the face of oppressive social codes lie at the root of human creativity. But there's another source of art we ought to think about, perhaps the most intriguing and certainly the most endearing of them all, which is the animal need to play. One of the most interesting discussions of this impulse can be found in a slim volume called The Comedy of Survival by the human ecologist Joseph Mika, published in 1974 towards the end of the Vietnam War, and in some ways a response to it. In his book, Mika contrasted the tragic with what he called the comic way of life. He said that we humans were tragic creatures because we had a tendency to push our disagreements to extreme and deadly conclusions. By contrast, he said, the other animals followed what he called the comic way, which enabled them to divert potentially deadly encounters into harmless play. Let me quote. It is a common feature of social life among animals that the purpose of intraspecific combat is to gain ascendancy over the adversary, not to destroy him. When animals, with the capacity to kill members of their own species, reach a point in their battles where death will likely ensue shortly, one combatant will frequently turn aside and ferociously attack some nearby harmless object, like a tree or a shrub, or in some other way inhibit the killing behavior or expend it harmlessly. Slaughter is necessary among animals only for nutritional reasons. When status and the maintenance of social order are at stake, shame and ritualized aggression are more appropriate. End of quote. He then argues that the comic way is the clue to understanding evolution itself. Another quote, evolution proceeds as an unscrupulous, opportunistic comedy, the object of which appears to be the proliferation and preservation of as many life forms as possible. Successful participants in it are those who live and reproduce even when times are hard and dangerous, not those who are best able to destroy enemies or competitors. Its ground rules for participants, including people, are those that also govern literary comedy. Organisms must adapt themselves to their circumstances in every possible way, must studiously avoid all or nothing choices, must seek alternatives to death, and must accept and revel in maximum diversity. Now, a good metaphor for this approach to living is jazz. The essence of jazz is improvisation, responding to other players and creating music never heard before without forethought or planning. Mika describes this as a spontaneous behavior whose only purpose is to please its participants and keep them playing. When goals or objectives appear, or when rules become rigid, play disappears. He says that humans didn't invent comedy or play. We are the beneficiaries of millions of years of evolutionary history. And I like the idea that the universe, in one sense, is just a rolling broadcast comedy. The reason, he says, play has contributed to our evolution is that it prompts us to take risks. Most play, and I'm quoting again, involves risk of some kind. Playful curiosity leads us to stick out our noses where they've never been before, or to test just how far we can crawl on that limb before it breaks. Art, like play, sometimes takes risks that threaten the tidiness that civilization values so highly. Art and play are sources of new experience, and they encourage change, so they worry people who like things to stay put and be obedient. They're not the kinds of activities that fit into neat categories, and they're full of surprises, end of quote. This is why tyrants hate artists, because art and play are subversive of authority and the status quo. So bearing all this in mind, It's instructive to watch children at play, dreaming up new realities, representing and repeating what they see around them, singing worlds into being. I took a holiday with my grandchildren a couple of years ago in Sussex when my little granddaughter was only 3. And I'd take her out for an evening walk before supper. And I was moved and actually stunned, fascinated by what would happen. She'd forget me. She'd walk down this country lane and she started singing her day, recalling what she'd done. Cheery pops for breakfast, toast and honey we had, then went to the shop. Daddy took me on the swing, and she sang her day. There was something kind of bardic about it. She was narrating her experiences, completely oblivious of me. She wasn't doing it to impress anyone. She was in her little creative artist's head, singing her day. It's instinctive to children. It's intuitive to children. Creativity is intrinsic to them. Alas, most of us lose it as the shadows of adulthood close around us, what Wordsworth called the shades of the prison house, and we become dull, boring, serious adults. Robert Hughes, the great art critic, says that artistic genius, the thing about the artistic genius, is their ability to recapture childhood at will, including its terrors and desires, and not just its innocence. I'm coming to my conclusion. Let me try to bring all this together with a quick sideways look at the Scottish dimension to my theme. 2 interesting claims are emerging. One says that creativity is related to nonconformity, social discomfort, moral dissonance, what Rebecca West described as the abnormal justifying itself, amplified by Graham Greene's fear of co-option by powerful interests. The other is the play instinct itself, which suggests that life has no purpose beyond its own enjoyment. The sheer pointless exuberance of living and enjoying life for its own sake, that's what play is. Combined, these 2 forces are the matrix of creativity. Before reaching my conclusion, let me apply these insights to Scotland. The Reformation of 1560 had a profound effect on the psyche of Scotland, and it's still strongly present in our cultural DNA, though it's rapidly diminishing in our own time as Scotland gets a bit more mixed. I would sum it up in philosophical language in this way. Scotland bought in spades into the teleological imperative, from the Greek word telos, meaning end or purpose. Life is serious. You're no here to enjoy yourselves. You're here for a purpose, to work, to fulfill yourselves, and above all, to save your miserable souls. That was the creed that promoted wonderfully and effectively the Protestant work ethic. It produced a nation of engineers and capitalists, but it placed play and creativity low down in its order of priorities. In fact, the only art that was really approved for a long time was writing, which suits me. The saving paradox is that a profound literary culture began to flourish in Scotland after the Reformation. And in time, as writing always does, it subverted authority and challenged hypocrisy. The historian T.C. Smout says that the peculiar richness and the flowering of the Scottish cultural enlightenment after 1740 can be partly explained by a process of action and reaction from the Reformation. We became a literate, argumentative nation that exalted words. We produced wonderful writers. Writing flourished in Scotland, and the wonderful byproduct was that it encouraged our native argumentativeness and even challenged the prevailing seriousness. But we were pretty feeble until recently in the other arts. Not a lot of good theatre, not much music, music being the devil's tool, though the Highland folk tradition never disappeared, as the Feis movement so clearly shows. Visual art confined after the Reformation to portraiture because you are close to idolatry, the worship of images, and only slowly able to emancipate itself, and not much dancing. Dancing being seen as only a prelude to sex, and we couldn't have too much of that. The unintended consequences of this enclosing seriousness was the emergence of a kind of social dissonance that was not always healthy or creative. And it's, I think, one reason why one strand in Scottish literature is the strand of duality, the binary strand. I think Scotland's long and destructive love affair with alcohol may have its roots in this as well. Deny people access to their anarchic creativity, and it displaces itself into destructive rather than creative channels. Likewise, as research has shown, if you reconnect disconnected children to their creative instincts, their skills improve right across the board. One of the ugliest paradoxes of our time is that we have created a new leisured class, workless men and women who are time-rich but poor in the inner resources to use time creatively, which is why our deprived communities are not only economically poor, they are culturally poor and getting poorer. Young people who have never learned how to use time creatively and pass it enjoyably are a menace to themselves and to society. The most important thing our educationists can do for young people today is to provide them with the capacity to use time well, and so rescue them from the boredom and ennui that lie at the root of so many of our social problems. I wonder if our failure here is not another example of the way the market has crowded other value systems off the public stage. If the human being is reduced to an economic unit, then training, not education, becomes the social imperative. Rather than enabling our young people to become inheritors and developers of culture, we train them to become units in the search for more GDP. And if they are unable to contribute to that purpose, we abandon them to the scrap heap. But if we educated them to get in touch with the artist who resides in every human being, we would not only provide them with spiritual resources that would last them a lifetime, we would almost certainly help them achieve in other areas of life, including the economic sphere. One of the most dramatic examples of how to do this is Venezuela's Sistema for Children's Orchestras, which we brought to Scotland 5 years ago and is now having a dramatic impact in Raploch, in Stirling, and which we're poised to establish in other communities across Scotland. It stands to reason that if play and creativity are intrinsic to our nature, their suppression or denial diminishes us, while their restoration may restore us to greater well-being. We are discovering in Raploch talented children who are capable of becoming outstanding professional musicians. That wouldn't have happened. Only one child in Raploch studied a musical instrument in the last several generations. And all over Scotland, all over Britain, there are communities like that are being stunted, their own creativity not allowed to express itself because the historical circumstances have crowded them out of the joy of disciplined creativity. Their suppression or denial diminishes all of us, while the restoration of their own need to play may restore us all to greater well-being. Let me now conclude by offering a theory of human creativity for your consideration. The riches of human culture seem to be mainly created by dissidents and outsiders who are, in Rebecca West's words, condemned by the laws and conventions that govern society. Over the centuries, their creations gather themselves into a great tradition which wise societies protect and hand on through institutions of learning such as universities, schools, and other cultural transmitters. If you've seen Alan Bennett's wonderful play, The History Boys, you'll remember how the history master Hector says to the boys, "Hand it on, boys, hand it on." He wants them to to learn poetry off by heart, to understand it, because he said you'll never know the time when you're going to need that poem. That poem's going to save your life, because you're going to meet a heartbreak, you're going to be divorced, you're going to get cancer, you're going to lose your job, you're going to face some terrible experiences, and then you'll recall that you read something that actually expressed the reality you're going through, and it will keep you safe. Margaret Drabble said that she loved Philip Larkin, the poet, because he reconciled us to our ills by the scrupulous way in which he notices them. Great artists do that, which is why we turn to them. You're afraid of death? Read Larkin's O Bard. You're confronting cancer. There's even a poem about confronting cancer in Larkin's 20th century English verse. Poets have done it all. And if you get it, if you can establish the capital in your own soul, the time will come when it will save you from a kind of spiritual famine. And that's what we should be doing more of, passing all that on. Pass it on, said Hector to the history boys. And the interesting thing here is this. The paradox is that it's usually the more conservative members of society who become the protectors of the culture that has been spun by the efforts of the spiritually homeless. I love that kind of ecology. It's the nutters, the radicals who create it. It's the conservatives who preserve it and hand it on. Hugh McDermott captured the paradox in these words. Scottish literature, like all other literatures, has been written almost exclusively by blasphemers, immoralists, dipsomaniacs, and madmen. But unlike most other literatures, it has been written about by ministers. So we have a virtuous circle at work here. I've suggested that play is instinctive to the human animal. Not only is its enjoyable pointlessness good for us, it seems to be one of evolution's instruments for encouraging us to take risks and explore and develop as a consequence. That is why it is subversive of power structures. It is by definition countercultural. Its most brilliant practitioners are often men and women who are at odds with conventional norms and customs. And there's nothing any of us can do, no matter how potent our power may be, to quench it. We can, of course, kill off our own creativity, our own playfulness, but we can never close it down in others. Artists, especially artists of genius, go on doing it, playing, experimenting, shoving themselves further out in that limb. Just think of the ferocity and intensity of Freud's portraiture over the years. That man just spent most of his life slapping paint on canvas. Go and see what he did in the great exhibition in London. I mean, he did it up to his 80s. I mean, he was in many ways a bit of a menace, especially to his female models. But my God, what he's left the rest of the world by that passionate playfulness with paint that he slapped on and those ferocious portraits of his. Intriguingly, as I've said, the people who work hardest to protect the cultural legacy created by these wayward artistic creatures tend to be of a more conservative disposition. They want to save the best of the past from the junkyard, which always threatens all our creations. Some commentators think we're not paying enough attention to that process of conservation today, and that we're in danger of falling into a state of cultural amnesia because we're not handing on the best of the tradition to young people today. A final word about what we can do to keep this virtuous circle revolving. We ourselves can resolve to start playing again if we've stopped playing. I've already mentioned the great art critic Robert Hughes, who said that artistic genius is nothing other than the ability to recapture childhood at will, including its terrors and desires, not just its Arcadian innocence, because childhood is terrifying as well as exulting. We live in grim economic times. But one of the lessons we can learn from the mess we made of the world is that we do not live by bread alone, in spite of what the Chancellor said today, and I've no idea what he said. I can't be bothered thinking about it. We live by the restless spirit within us that prompts us to more important activities than getting and spending. We're all artists, even if the only work we produce is our own lives. So the first thing we ought to try to do is to make our own lives more playful, especially in these foreboding days. So I'll leave you with a final thought. I live near some busy primary schools in Edinburgh, and every day I watch parents taking their young children to school. The parents trudge, hodden doon, heads down, but the children skip. So here's my final suggestion. Let us all banish the economic and political blues by learning to skip again. Thank you.
Richard has kindly agreed to take questions and comments, and there may even be tweets. Are there tweets? Yeah.
If there aren't any tweets, there are bound to be some twits.
So maybe we should start with the tweets rather than the twits, should we?
Okay, yeah.
Well, I'll start with a question from the Twitter space. Animals also get bored. Why do they show this in negative ways instead of positive cultural ways that mankind sometimes does?
Because they haven't developed these big brains. But they do play. I mean, animals do cavort. I mean, and a lot of it is, I guess, a kind of an instinctive response to the sheer joy of being alive. I'm reading a wonderful book about the peregrine at the moment. And peregrines hunt most of the time, but then when they've got a full belly, when they've had a good night's sleep, when they've done their washing, they play. So I think, there's something about the universe that is playful. I mean, there's a bit in the Bible that when God created the world, all the sons of the earth shouted for joy, and the stars danced. Myth, of course, don't take it too literally.
No.
There's our big brains, I think.
Have we anybody from the audience? Yes.
Should the arts councils be abolished or empowered?
Well, the Scottish Arts Council has been abolished. It's been subsumed into a new body called Creative Scotland. I mean, I think having arts councils is as important as having religions around, because they point us away from the kind of purely material, economic ways of understanding life. And it's interesting that the Arts Council movement came out of World War II. The government wanted to cheer people up during those dark days, and they put on concerts, and gradually after the war they thought, well, this is good, let's keep this around, because a lot of this stuff gets starved of oxygen as well as fun. So I think it's good that our country does. They don't put a lot into it, but it's a significant amount. And I think it's good that government, simply by supporting artists in all sorts of ways, is saying there's more to life than simply growing the economy. In many ways, I think we might create a healthier country if a bit more went in, because it seems to me at the root of even economic brilliance, and economies are important, science, all of these things are important, but they're all related to the human imagination, and if you liberate that, I think everything goes up. So yes, I mean, I think that you need to have support and subsidy, but what you don't want to do is to do it in such a way that actually paralyzes the creativity of the artist. And of course, it's an inexact science, and very often certain newspapers don't like who gets the money for doing what. They don't like that particular statue. They think that play is rubbish. So you've got to have a thick skin if you're an art bureaucrat.
Any others? Yes?
I'm really looking forward to watching the audience as they go home skipping. A bit worried about some of us, though, because I think we might have forgotten how, and we'll break our legs. Serious question, though, which was about, you mentioned quite early on, this issue of we don't like to waste time. Is that really inbred? Is that intuitive? Or is that something that is drummed into us in school by our parents? Don't waste time. You know, this is not a rehearsal. And I just wonder sometimes whether we have forgotten to just be and just chill.
Yep. Thanks for that very important balancing statement. I don't want to give the impression that we have compulsively to fill every unforgiving minute, but I think my basic thesis is sound. I mean, just take yourself back. Your synapses, you're just fired. Homo sapiens is just emerging. We're looking out in the universe, these big brains of ours that are asking questions and not simply programmed by nature instinctively. And you're hunting and gathering. And you're at home in the cave, you've hunted, you've gathered, you've killed the antelope, you've roasted it, you've eaten it, you're sitting in the cave around the campfire. What happens? Yeah, you'll fall asleep shortly. But someone starts recalling the day. Someone maybe with a gift for narrative, say, and you remember how young Gullion crawled under the antelope's belly and shoved the thing right up and the blood poured out and there was a great carpet of blood all over the heather. And you've got the beginning of narrative. And the hunter himself, he's sharpened his spear and he's sitting by the campfire listening to the story and he starts whittling a pattern round the top of his spear. So you start getting, and there's a wee boy at the back of the cave and he picks up a piece of coloured stone, chalky stone, and he draws the hunt. It's time that's doing that. You're filling time, you're passing time. And I think that has to be done in an unpressured way. I mean, one of the enemies of an artist is the wrong kind of pressure, you know, the deadline. You need a capacity for reverie, for laziness, to let things happen. Especially if you're a writer, you've got the tyranny of the blank sheet. You have to wait upon that. You have to start and it comes. So you're absolutely right. As well as filling time productively, you need to be able to waste time creatively. You need to be able to look in the distance, put your feet up and look at, and not enough of that goes on, I think, in our culture. So thanks for a necessary correction, but it does not destroy my thesis.
Yes, at the back.
Although you focused on the concept that the crucible of artistic production is often in difficulty, in struggle, in perhaps variant behavior, etc., surely a proportion also is generated by joy, by pleasure, by the ebullience of life.
Sure.
Can
Yeah.
you put a proportion on that?
I don't think I can. And a lot of it's temperament. I mean, I tend to enjoy more melancholy, more serious art and poetry. I love Mozart, but I still think Bach is played in heaven. Karl Barth, the famous Swiss theologian, said that God listened in secret to Mozart. I personally like something with a more melancholic depth, but that's temperamental. I think there's no doubt at all that a lot of, especially a lot of musical art and some visual art is kind of playful and joyful. I think the really deep stuff, however, is much more encompassing. It can express joy, but you're incomplete unless you can also express sadness and profound tragedy, because we are tragic creatures. We all die, and unlike the other animals, we know we're going to die, and some of us die horribly, some of us die young. And I think that in many ways, writing is probably the art that captures that best, and a great novelist like Dickens, say, will capture both the joy and the absurdity of life as well as the profound sorrow and sadness. So I would think both poles. But of course, in saying anything, you can't see everything, so inevitably I distort. And I think that even play can be a kind of serious thing. You can actually play deadly things. Kids play shooting other people. I remember having a wee sword as a boy. It's partly because of the movies and all of that. We replicate what we see. We respond to it. We express it and represent it. And it's tragic as well as joyful, but we do need the other thing too.
More comments, questions? Yeah, Hugh.
Yeah, I was intrigued by your quote from Graham Greene, and I agree with him insofar as literature is concerned, that disloyalty and subversion are at the heart of it. But how does one apply that to Bach, who you mentioned, or Michelangelo producing the Pieta?
You don't have to apply everything to everyone. Graham Greene was saying that it's a particular virtue of the novelist, of the writer. I think that, let's face it, a lot of great art has been produced under the patronage of religion. And you've instanced great examples of that, both in the sense working for the church. And there's a danger, of course, in romanticizing a lot of that. I mean, a lot of what went on, the kind of church's patronage of all that, was responding to a specific kind of request to represent a particular understanding of life that religion promoted. Nevertheless, the great artists do more than simply respond to the brief. They take it further. And the astonishing thing about, I'm not a musician, but the astonishing thing about Bach with his playfulness. I mean, one critic I read about, he said he just produced these things with a kind of prodigal playfulness. They just poured out of him. They weren't just written for services in the kirk. They just came, they just flowed out of him in the kind of prodigal way, like creation itself. So I think it's all kind of interconnected. I don't want to be too neat in my thesis. I had to find something to say to you, and that's what I decided to say. Okay.
Yes.
Would you agree that time is elastic depending on your age?
Time is elastic. God,
Depending
it
on
is.
your
You get
age,
to my age, and it's swifter than a weaver's beam. How old are you, brother? Yeah, and I think it's maybe, for children feel it as a heavier burden. I mean, my wee granddaughter, who's a wonderful musician already, comes in sometimes and she says, I'm bored. Her mother will not allow that word in the house because she's surrounded by things to do, but I think children do. I remember when I was in the army, finding that time just crawled. You know, I wanted to finish my national service and get on with my studies, and it just, you know, it just limped. But you get to my age, and my God, it'll soon be Christmas. And then I'll soon be dead. So, I mean, yeah. But that's because the bit that's left is much shorter than the bit you've had.
What I was trying to say was, as you get older, the time for creativity appears to be shorter by the year. So you then have this frenetic desire to achieve.
Yeah.
Whereas you're doing Sudoku or playing with an iPad on a train.
Yeah.
Whereas a child, the day stretches into interminable
Yep.
nothingness. So you have the time
Yeah.
to create.
And that's why a lot of great art is produced by old people, old people in a hurry to get it done. Freud's another example of that. And you know, the people that just decide they're dying of cancer. I've just been sent Philip Gould's book to review. The spin doctor, Labour guy, died of cancer this year. And he rushed to get that book out. That too there's something biblical about that, redeeming the time. The time is short. I love all those Advent themes, you know, the work while it is yet day, the night cometh when no one can work. So it can be a whip on your back. Yeah, thanks for that.
Can I just
Yeah.
ask?
Sorry, can I take this? Yeah.
Something of what you said is reminding me of the film Dead Poets Society, I don't know if you know it, which explores, I suppose, the tension between poetry being passed on by the conservatives and yet actually having the power to provoke the radical and the expression of the radical. Just a general question about how do we pass on culture, riches of culture, in a way which is exciting rather than boring. So often seems to be children's experience in school of poetry, art, music, the whole gamut.
Yeah. I guess you have to be excited. Excited people excite others. If you're bored, you'll bore others. Great teachers have that capacity. And of course, it's not the same thing as entertaining, because, I mean, great creativity involves a hell of a lot of hard work. I mean, we're making these kids in Raploch practice hours a day. I mean, Nicola Benedetti, wonderful young violinist, practices still 3 to 6 hours a day. It's play, but it's disciplined play. And so I think it's a combination of discipline and enthusiasm, charisma, excitement, and you know it when you've had a great teacher, when they ignite that kind of interest in you. But if they're dull and plodding and just getting through the day themselves, and I think it may be because a lot a lot of adults lose their own playfulness. I mean, they're not able to dive back into their own childhood. I do think that we need to spend a bit more time enabling adults, especially those who are responsible for mentoring or teaching or forming children, to get back in touch with all of that stuff, to make what they do exciting. I mean, I think teaching should be the most exciting vocation that there is on earth, especially teaching the young. But you have to keep the teachers themselves excited, developed, informing them, allowing them ways to get back in touch with their own inner artists. And I don't know how much of that goes on. It may be because there's so much political interference with education all the time, almost as much as there is in the health service. Maybe we'll get through that with a curriculum of excellence. Once that bit's done and established, maybe they can then start jiving a bit. I think that the great teachers tear up the curriculum, because they're handing on the great tradition. They're not conforming to a particular agenda. And I think the great thing about the curriculum for excellence, it recognizes that. So it's a question of getting teachers liberated so that they're no longer sticking to the script. They're doing jazz, educational jazz. Frightening, but that will get people playing.
Now, somebody else was wanting to come in.
Can I just
Yes.
follow through on that point, actually, exactly, is what, if anything, can the 21st century university do to stimulate creativity? Or are we simply a product of a Presbyterian culture and we're doomed to failure by implication?
I don't think the Presbyterian culture has much to do with it now. I think the bigger enemy is the market, and the fact that universities are having to compete, they're having to become research institutions, they're having to develop ways of making a hell of a lot of money. And I don't know what to do about it. I'm not involved in university life, but it kind of does worry me. I mean, the classic definition of an education was hectares. You pass on the culture, and it was meant to enlarge the spirit of the person. It wasn't meant to train the person for a job or for anything else. And I think that's got switched. And I think that a lot of our universities now are inevitably buying into that market. Let me give you an example from theology. I mean, I happen to know, you used to imagine that universities were places that simply followed the truth, that didn't have a particular angle. It is undoubtedly the case that if you want to attract rich postgraduate American students to Scottish universities, you have to have a strong stream of evangelical theology being taught. There's one theologian in Scotland called the Rainmaker for that reason, because he attracts scads of evangelical scholars from America. I'm slightly worried about the fact that they're trimming the market. I mean, it's a perfectly valid thing to be an evangelical scholar, but I feel just a little bit concerned that universities might just be appealing to appeal to particular constituencies because they're filling their treasury with big fat American dollars. That kind of thing bothers me a bit, because it seems to me that one of the things that universities should be doing is subverting all theories and isms constantly, teaching them, letting people know what they are, but not simply being training colleges that, kind of potato peeling machines. So I'm a wee bit worried about that, but he's the man you have to ask, not me.
I feel Richard will be poor but upright.
Yeah.
Any more questions?
There's one there.
Yes.
Communication in politics and in religion. We see time and again politicians being straitjacketed by their parties or by their governments, not to say anything untoward. And I mean, at the moment we're seeing the problems of Greece being discussed endlessly in Europe, and this square peg being pushed into a round hole because they're just determined it's going to go into that round hole, and yet they know perfectly well, they're all in denial, they know perfectly well it's not going to fit, and they just push the problem down the line. And in religion also we have the situation of theologians and practitioners in churches being straitjacketed by that institution and not being free to really communicate as they would wish because of the constraints of that. How do we get around this
it's a tough one. I think it's related to power, institutional power, and political parties are a particular example of that. I mean, the main ethic of a political party is to get in power. They have policies and strategies and all that, but on the whole, you can't affect anything unless you're in power. And it seems to me that that has come to dominate a lot of, that's why you get very little what I would call really dangerous, reckless political leadership. They're all kind of tacking to the ground where most of the voting goes on. It's one reason why they won't, until fairly recently, take on the press. For instance, you can't have a really honest discussion about drugs policy in this country. No politician will discuss it because the tabloids will be down on them like that. And we have an insane drugs policy. We have this war on drugs where, you know, we love these wars on terrorism, wars on drugs. And rather than think through an evidence-based, effective way of handling what is an untidy human reality, which is the desire to get out of our heads, and it can be done in a way that doesn't actually ruin you. A lot of people get ruined by it. But it's a very good example of how you can't have an honest discussion about it. One of the few politicians who was prepared to be honest about it was Mo Mowlam. And she got clobbered by the leadership. How dare you admit to smoking pot? And not only when you were at university, but now that you're a cabinet minister. For God's sake, I mean, that's the Antichrist. And I don't know how you get through that, except maybe by hoping more brave people will come. The brave loners who don't get to be cabinet ministers can be quite useful. People like Tam Dalyell, who never actually made it into the cabinet, but he was a very typical Scottish maverick who pointed to the fact that the emperor was stark bollock naked when everyone else claimed how gloriously apparelled he was. So I think, but I think maybe we're always going to be up against that because power makes these adjustments and compromises. And a bit of me sympathizes with that because in order to get something done, you have to get into power and you compromise inevitably. You just hope the compromise doesn't actually corrupt your soul totally.
Well, that's true because if you think back when Tony led us into the Iraq War, hundreds of Labour MPs sat on their hands, they were mute. Yep. And they were, you know,
I know.
Robin Cook was virtually the only one who stood up and said anything. I mean, communicated. The rest were just on mute.
And I suspect that Gordon's soul was broken by that. I think if Gordon had resigned with Robin Cook, we would not have gone into Iraq. Absolutely. And I suspect that was partly because he wanted to succeed. Yeah, I mean, but we're all moral. I bet you've got moral compromises in your life. My God, I have them in mine. So, I mean, I don't think we should be too promiscuously projecting them onto other people. I think it's just something to do with our flawed nature. You just hope that you're honest enough about yourself, maybe to admit yours and occasionally to try to be a wee bit braver. But where you've got power, you get compromise. And church is about power as well, which is why you have this absurd notion of an official truth, as though there could be a permanent official truth about anything. But if you're trying to run a religious institution that has a package that you have to promise and vow to, that's the way it goes.
More comments, questions?
Not many women ask questions in Inverness. Or is that just that the men...
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I ask you what you feel and think about random people and organisations being allowed to set up their own schools in England and teach things that are really against scientific evidence in schools?
I can't say I'm particularly keen on it. I mean, I think that I'd probably just say two things. If they're going to do it, the state shouldn't subsidise it. If you want to set up a confessional college that's pushing a particular line, and people will pay to go to it, then that's fine as long as you're not teaching hatred. If you want to teach creationism and you can get a budget together to do it, then I believe in the freedom to believe and think absurd things. But I do not think, and I think it's an example again of the way that politics, government is often afraid of taking on religion. And I think that if we were setting out a rational education policy today, we wouldn't have faith schools at all. Faith schools came out of our history, and you can't start history over, so you continue them. Churches were responsible for education in our country before the state came in, and that that endures. You can't rewind that. You're stuck with it. It's certainly true of Catholic education in Scotland. That was a response to persecution. And it provided Catholic children with safety. It now, I think, helps to preserve sectarianism and all the stuff that we trouble from in Scotland. So I think my quick answer is that I don't think we should establish any new faith schools that are supported by government. And I think that if you want to set up an Islamic school or any other kind of a school to teach, or a creationist school, you have a perfect right to do it. I don't think my tax dollars should be going in to support that.
Yep.
You gave two examples of creative dysfunction. One is homosexuality and the other related to suffering during the Second World War. Where do you see the main ones are present in our current culture?
It's a very good question. Probably, by definition, we won't know the people who are... It could be the mentally ill. I mean, if you're looking around for victims in our society, for people who are having a hard time, one of the things we're actually quite good at is discovering them and overcoming them. We oppressed women for a long time, and that's ending, except in a kind of a way in religion still. We've ended discrimination against gay people, certainly in society. I already treated of that. There are, I think, mental and physical disabilities may be an area where we've a long way to go. But by definition, I think we ourselves probably won't understand who out there is suffering from the way society is organized, because they may not have spoken yet. One of the things that does happen to victimized minorities is that in time they rebel. It's a very good exercise to look back 100 years and say, how did they not realize that what they were doing was monstrously wrong? And then to project 100 years ahead and to say, what will people 100 years hence looking back at us be saying, how could they do that? It may be that what we're doing to the planet, if the planet could write, in many ways, maybe the planet is wiser than we think. It will probably rebel in its own way. What's your own guess? I mean, the poor are always, but not many of them seem to be able at the moment to get in touch with their creativity. A lot of them become very good comedians.
I think maybe we'll have a different view of riots in the future.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know any more than you do, obviously.
Yeah.
It seems to be interesting just to think about how they are.
There certainly seems to be an epidemic of mental illness in our time, and which is related to lots of other social diseases in our society. The wrong kind of pressures in people.
And age, I think.
Age.
We all seem pretty affluent, but
Yeah.
I think there are many people
Yeah.
who there'll be a lot of torture,
Yeah.
artistic developments.
The flip side, of course, is that we may move into a situation where we're so happy and contented and fat that we will never produce another valid piece of art in our lives. I don't see that happening, because some people are just born miserable, but you know what I mean.
Yes.
I lead a very disciplined life, and I put that down to being a Virgo. I seem to be born with common sense, and these days you don't appear to have that. Discipline, i.e. I get up at the same time each day, breakfast, wash, shave, dress, go to the newspaper, read most of the paper, then get the code word, then the Sudoku, and then I put that down and I go out and face the day. And that's the way that I seem to be able to cope with it. I've just kept a notepad these days. You keep on hearing on television, and I just put down the words awesome, magic, patronizing, lessons learned, and they don't seem to learn them, and they're going to deal with something robustly. They're going to say it every time and time and time again, especially from the politicians, of course.
So are you saying that we should do astrological readings of all politicians and only Virgos get into Parliament? Only virgins in Parliament. That would be, my God, it would be a very empty house, wouldn't it?
Yes.
I think, I don't know if this is a comment or a question, we'll see what happens, but I think actually listening to what you're saying, there's a danger, I think, for us to put in opposition orthodoxy and creativity,
Yeah.
or discipline, or,
Yeah.
or tradition, in
Yeah.
fact, because I fear you've been talking about the role of all those things
Yeah.
in the creative process.
Mhm.
And I think perhaps where creativity becomes stunted is when we actually start to oppose those two, put them at poles apart. And I feel my own creative processes have needed, at some time, I've needed to understand the orthodoxy, I've needed to
Sure.
understand the
Yeah.
rubric, to
Yeah.
be able then to fly from that.
Oh gosh,
into
yes. Yeah.
creativity.
Yeah.
So there, it's something about balance and encouraging the balance, allowing the discipline for the creativity to emerge.
Sure.
But not for that to be, I suppose it's about not allowing that to be powerfully imposed.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
rather
Yeah.
we choose.
Yeah.
We choose our discipline and our tradition
Yeah.
and our orthodoxy.
No, thanks for that. I entirely agree. But, and I think that in order to move a tradition on, you have to master the tradition. All the great artists who've created a new genre and moved a thing on have, first of all, become great. I mean, great jazz musicians are great musicians first, before they have the courage to improvise. The trouble, I mean, and so you hold these things in tension. The trouble, however, with a tradition, and it's particularly true of religious traditions and political traditions, the trouble with anything like that is it attracts people who like stability, and stability is important because you can't just recklessly be changing all the time. But you do need change agents, otherwise things never move on. They never get subverted. If it hadn't been for radical, subversive women, you would not have got the vote. You would not be able to be the creative woman you are today because you would have been kept on your knees in the kitchen. And it's only because traditions get subverted, by the victims and by the disloyalists, which is why I think what Graham Greene said is very important. Disloyalty is very important because if you're utterly loyal to an institution, it can never change and adapt. And it's the disloyal. I discovered that I'm a disloyalist. I mean, this memoir I've written, I'm trying to understand how I got into so much trouble in the church. And I realized, and it took me a while really to figure it out, that I was not born with the loyalty gene to institutions, which was terrible because I ended up running one. And no wonder they hated it, because, I mean, I was subverting the very thing I was supposed to be leading. If I'd been given a kind of psychometric profile of myself at birth, I would just avoid that job. Don't become a bishop. But you do need people, a few odd people, who help the institutions move on. But it's a dialect.
I think there's something very compassionate in your story, actually, because I think that having entered into an orthodoxy and then discovering yourself through that, yourself which is not loyal or not choosing that, not preferring that, that actually there's an integrity, that there's something about the voice that can come and be heard, because it's in that place of orthodoxy and saying, we need to move this forward. I suppose I'm saying if you're changing something, it's good to know what you're changing, and it helps you communicate
Yeah.
with others who
Yeah.
want to change, to say,
Yeah.
this is where we are, this is where we're going. I can see that.
Yeah.
I can do that.
Yeah. And you're right, there is a kind of person, the kind of person that's most difficult to cope with is the person who's scornful of a whole discipline and tradition, but they themselves have not ever compelled themselves to master anything. And a lot of those are disappointed people who've never actually made it. The people who try to be writers and end up being critics. I mean, I know you can sneer at that because criticism is a kind of writing, but a lot of people who do that kind of stuff, you feel that underneath they'd rather be writing the novel or the creative piece of non-fiction or whatever it is, and said another bloody book written by someone else comes through the door for them to review. And not surprisingly, the bitterness can often show. I'm amazed at the bitterness that a lot of literary critics show. I mean, if I'm given a book I detest, I would not review it. I don't think you should use a review to vent your spleen or to hurt someone. You can be validly critical in an affirming kind of a way. So a lot of disappointed people become very bitter at people who have, and I mean, it's a very unequal world. Some people have prodigious talents, and some people don't. It's partly a combination of discipline, but I mean, I know some young children who just have an enormous musical gift. And the person 2 rows along, with practice, will become a perfectly competent musician, but never a great musician. And it's an unequal world. Just as some people have great visual sense, some people are good with words, and so on. And some people we're all good at something, and some people are just good at being average. We should rejoice in that.
Is there any last comment or question? Yeah. There may be several. I thought I saw another hand up there. Yeah.
I'd just like to ask you whether the older Freud, with his, has also addressed this sort of conflict between individual spontaneity and creativity that moves society along, and also with this need to hold society with some kind of frame
Yeah.
hold people together, the
Yep.
stability as well as the anchor.
Civilization and its discontents. Sigmund Freud's great study of that very thing, in which he said that because we are animals, I mean, we are highly complex creatures because we're animals, but we can't just live as animals because we'd claw and bite at each other, but we're not completely civilized either. So civilization is a compromise, and we hate the way it restrains our appetites. On the other hand, we couldn't any longer live in the wild state. I think he can overdo it a little bit, and I think of Sigmund Freud as more a priest-artist than a scientist. I don't think that he created a new science. I think he created a new way of interpreting the complexity of being human, but I love him. I'm a Freudian. I mean, if you're either a Platonist, an Aristotelian, a Catholic, a Protestant, a Jungian, a Freudian, I'm a Freudian Aristotelian Protestant, I think.
Does anybody want to come in? Or is that the killer line, the Freudian Aristotelian Protestant? You want to come back, sir?
You made a comment about the war on drugs. I myself believe that drugs and drink are a cabal of the state to anesthetize those who would be driven insane by their creative desires that they are unable to fulfill.
I think you should write that one up. I mean, there's undoubtedly something in that. I don't think there's a conspiracy to drug people, however. I mean, I think that most of us, I mean, my drug is alcohol. I'm not an alcoholic, but my drug is the legal one. And of course, the legal ones are the killing ones in Scotland. That's the paradox. It's tobacco and alcohol that do most of the killing. I just think that we need sane, evidence-based policies here. And I think we also need to admit that life is messy and tragic, and that there is a funny kind of need, especially in politicians, to get tidy societies. You're never going to get tidy societies. We'll always muck it up. And you wouldn't want to live in a tidy society. You wouldn't want to live in 16th century Geneva for more than a weekend if you could get out alive. And I think that there's a certain kind of tidying up mind that knows what's good for the rest of us, and it wants to sort us all out. And it's a kind of Puritan thing. It prevails in religious and non-religious cultures, and I think that we need to get out of our skulls. We need chemical vacations. We need sexual vacations. We need all of those things. They're all dangerous, and they can all destroy us and ruin our lives and hurt other people, and you're never, ever going to tidy it up. But if you can't talk about it, you can't help people to develop an art of how to do it wisely and well. Aristotle was the great guide here, the middle way between extremes of deprivation and excess. And if we could teach our kids how to be sexually artistic, how to be artistic in their use of euphoric substances. In other words, get joy out of them, but not be imprisoned by them. But we can't even talk about it. You can't even get sane discussions in school in these subjects. You get downed on by the authorities, by the tabloids. It's to me, very, very sad indeed. I think the ancient Greeks were better at it than we are.
Thank you very much.
I'm done, I think.
Richard. I think it's not every day that one has a lecture from an Aristotelian Freudian Protestant. And it is my very pleasant duty to thank you on behalf of the audience, Richard, for a fascinating and maybe at times provoking lecture. Whether or not you agree with the several theses that Richard provoked us into thinking about culture, I think he's made us think about culture in a new way. As educationists, and as an educationist myself, I think I sometimes writhed at the thought of the pigeonhole Richard might have put us in, but I think you've challenged us to equip our children and our young people to fill their time on earth with a purposive and creative activity. And I've no doubt if we succeeded in part in doing this, we would transform their lives. So we're really very grateful to you, Richard, for coming to Inverness this evening and giving us this lecture. And I would like to ask you to express your appreciation in the conventional way.